Hello and welcome. I'm John A. Torres, engagement editor for Florida Today, a part of the USA Today network. Today, we'll be talking about some of the items on Florida's ballot and hopefully providing you with important information as you prepare to vote come Election Day. Our topic today are the 6 proposed amendments you'll see on your ballot. What are they and how will they impact you? I'm no expert, but I know 2 guys who are. Please welcome again to our show James Call and John Kennedy, who cover Florida politics for the Tallahassee Democrat. Hey guys, welcome.
Thank you, John.
Let's jump right in. Amendment 1 changes school board elections from nonpartisan to partisan starting in 2026. Why is this happening, and is it good or bad, or what is this going to do?
Well, this is an idea that Republicans have been pushing in the legislature for a little while. It was put on the ballot by the legislature. Partisan school boards are something that we've seen them fought over in recent election seasons. They are nonpartisan. Florida used to have partisan races, but did away with them in 1998 as a constitutional amendment. That was passed by almost a 2-to-1 margin. But Republican leaders in Florida seem to feel lucky this year, and they've put the partisan idea back before voters.
Yeah, the reason why, this is what the political class does. It politicizes everything, in the pursuit of power and class. Governor Ron DeSantis and his allies winning control of the school boards as key to reshaping the public education system. And they have complained that candidates talk and run like the Republicans, but then they refuse to engage in the culture war battles that have been playing out in the schools. This amendment was sponsored by Fort Myers Representative Spencer Roach, and he promoted partisan school board races with the question, why should you be able to use the cover of the law to hide your ideology or platform from voters? So that's what that is.
And of course, many say these races are already partisan. Governor Ron DeSantis has weighed in with endorsements, and Democrats are endorsing too. And whoever wins seems to crow about the results, saying it's changing the approach of school boards. Republicans claim more parental rights and, are being advanced by their candidates. And Democrats say they're poised to put an end to the culture war fights that have so dominated local school boards and turned what used to be kind of routine meetings about classroom issues into what have become hours-long clashes over LGBTQ rights, bathroom policy, Black history, and plenty more. DeSantis has ginned up school board races, and voters now are being asked, whether or not they should now know the partisan leanings of these candidates. That's what this ballot basically advances. And a vote yes here probably cements into place that voters will be deciding primarily on whether they like a Democrat or Republican on the school board, not so much about the issues in play in that county.
Also, interesting footnote here, like in the August primary, in the nonpartisan school board races, Governor DeSantis had endorsed 20 states, and only 6 of them won. So he's backing this amendment, and if the primary in August is any indication of the voter sentiment, you would not expect it to pass.
And speaking of primaries, I know that we had an issue this year all throughout the state with write-in candidates that only join in to lock the primary as like a ghost candidate for one particular party. Would that take effect here as well if this passes? So we could essentially see one political party's members not being able to vote for the school board. Is that correct?
Sure,
well, that's a possibility. Yes. If you have no candidate for one party, the other party could close their primary with a write-in candidate.
Oh, interesting. All right, gentlemen. Well, let's jump to Amendment 2. So Amendment 2 on the Florida ballot establishes a state constitutional right to hunt and fish. 23 states have already adopted similar measures, but I'm curious, what exactly changes? I thought we already had the right to hunt and fish in our law.
Well, I
This is
guess
to
we don't
create
have
a
a
loophole.
constitutional right to it, and that's what this would do. James?
Yeah. This creates a loophole. This is a fascinating amendment to study. So what it does it mean that the use of gill nets would come back? It's a possibility. The amendment language gives a lot of people concern, the Sierra Club, the Florida Bar, and other environmentalists, that the use of traditional methods for fishing and hunting would seem to essentially repeal laws that prohibit the gill net, as well as steel jaw traps. And as a constitutional right to hunt and fish, there's a fear that it would supersede private property rights and expand hunting and fishing into state parks and wildlife preserves. I mean, the way this amendment is written, it could be problematic.
And
Well, this was an amendment that the National Rifle Association put forward. They're looking to make Florida, as you pointed out a moment ago, John, this would make Florida the 24th state with such a law. And it was seen as kind of rooted in concerns that private property rights could harm hunting access. And similarly, it was seen as a potential basis for lawsuits challenging hunting and fishing regulations. Opponents have raised this issue about gill nets and other limits on commercial fishing that could be overturned if this amendment is passed, and some sharp lawyers start litigating. Now, the Florida legislature, which includes plenty of mostly Democrats wary of the NRA, they voted almost unanimously to put this amendment on the ballot. So there's some that clearly believe that this is more of an amendment that will protect mom and apple pie rights to bring your kid fishing or hunting and make sure developers can't put no fishing signs up on open land. But in voting or opposing the measure, voters aren't really going to know, that this is the final story. A lot may come down to deciding whether or not you can trust the NRA, and that this is only about preserving an almost sacred right in this country to hunt and fish.
And those who don't know at home, I'm sorry, James, the use of gill nets in the past has really has caused a lot of concern, because they basically are just are miles and miles of nets, if I'm not mistaken, that sort of catch anything that swim into it.
It was an incredible legislative battle to get the gill net ban passed and approved. And what it did was devastate so many coastal fishing communities along the northern coast. It decimated, communities in like Wakulla, Franklin, and Gulf counties, no longer being able to use the gill net. So then to come back 30 years later with a constitutional amendment to allow use of the gill net, I mean, to those communities that suffered so much in that economic devastation, you just have to wonder about that.
Well, I'm not sure if it's clear that this is going to open the door to gill nets again. I think that's subject to future litigation.
Right.
That's why you really address that.
Yeah, correct. That's what I mean about the use of the language. The use of the language may be problematic. That traditional methods for fishing and hunting, and one could argue that man has used nets to fish since the beginning of recorded history. I mean, what's more traditional than using a net?
True. All right. Well, that's a lot there to mull over. Let's go now. Cue the Pink Floyd music, and let's head to Amendment 3, which you can't watch 5 minutes of TV these days without being assaulted with one ad for or against Amendment 3, which legalizes marijuana for those 21 and over recreationally. What's the downside? And I've been hearing a lot about the state income, versus cartels making money. What is your take on this, guys?
Well, it's a $2 billion industry at the moment, and that's just medical marijuana. This is really quite interesting. I was taken when Senator Joe Gruters made his announcement that he supports the amendment. He talked about that, in his since high school, marijuana was always easily available, and let's just normalize it. So in a way, it is a class issue, because in other communities, lives have been dramatically altered with convictions, marijuana possession convictions. And so now, this ends the war on poverty, the war on drugs concerning marijuana. And, a million voters, a million Floridians signed the petition to put it on the ballot.
Yeah, this is an amendment, a lot of people have clear opinions on, and polls show so far, maybe it will top the 60% mark that is needed to become law. It's going to be close, though. Public smoking, as James pointed out a moment ago, it's one area that the legislature seems intent on prohibiting, and it kind of echoes one of Governor DeSantis's criticisms that Florida is going to smell like weed. Well, maybe not, if I guess they prohibit public smoking. Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried has already weighed in about how this amendment, if passed, should spark overhaul of the state's current medical marijuana structure. We have this very tightly regulated, limited number of companies that can produce, distribute, and sell medical marijuana. She kind of wants to open the doors a little bit more to more companies if this measure passes. Similarly, anyone can arrested or convicted of small possession of marijuana, she says, should be freed from county jails. That all this, there would be a lot of changes wreaked if this measure gets approved by voters. It's likely that marijuana companies like Trulieve, which has put more than $60 million into the effort to get it on the ballot and is pushing for its passage, that they're going to make a lot of money off legalized marijuana. A big shift for a company that is now limited to medical marijuana cultivation, distribution, and sales. There are also about 850,000 medical marijuana cards in Florida that are obtained through the state and through doctor prescriptions. But recreational marijuana opens this market to millions of more Floridians. So, critics are blasting the amendment, not just for legalizing a product that in Florida remains illegal at the federal level, but also for basically fueling what is already a lucrative marijuana monopoly among this handful of companies. That kind of goes back to what Fried wants, to kind of break up that monopoly. So the legislature can revisit this licensure structure, and they may next year, and that would likely trigger a big lobbying fight in the Florida legislature, with everyone well aware of the kind of money that is at play here. Now, tax-wise, recreational marijuana could bring in more than $400 million a year in state tax revenue, according to state economists. And marijuana advocates say this will help education and local government. But of course, there's nothing that is directly dictating where the money goes. But that'll be another fight before lawmakers, if approved by voters this fall.
And
if we unpack the campaign against this amendment, I think it would really reveal how disingenuous and insincere Florida lawmakers are in making policy and discussing policy with the voters. This amendment, arguments against it are just so. If there's a monopoly, there's 22 licenses issued right now, and Governor Ron DeSantis is sitting on 25 licenses, all authorized with the growth in population or people with medical marijuana licenses. So if a cartel exists, it's a cartel that the legislature and the state created. The idea that Florida all of a sudden is going to smell like a marijuana bar. We're able to regulate cigarette smoking and tobacco. And so what is going on here? This law, the marijuana laws are based in, as Nikki Fried pointed out the other day, are based in race and class. And this is just a way, the arguments that are now being made, we created the situation. Florida lawmakers created the situation. And I do not understand the argument that it creates a monopoly or institutionalize a monopoly when within 3 miles of the state capitol, 7 different companies selling medical marijuana. That does not sound like a monopoly to me.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds insincere. You know, I have several friends that have, you know, medical marijuana cards, and I have gone with them to renew their licenses every few months, and it's just a moneymaker for the state or whoever is making money on this, because the doctors really don't examine them. They just ask, "Why do you want to take medical marijuana?" And you know, the answer is,
And if you have
anxiety.
the money, and if you have the money, and if you're willing to pay the money to the state, you can legally smoke marijuana.
Yeah. Right.
Well, we have a political clash over this amendment as well, because we have Governor Ron DeSantis fighting it, and we have Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump saying that he's going to vote for the amendment as a Florida resident. So for Republicans, there's a little bit of a split there as well. So it's really one of the most fascinating push and pulls that we're having as a ballot measure this year before voters.
That will be fascinating. And again, if I'm not mistaken, all of these amendments need 60% of the vote to pass. Is that correct?
At least 60%. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's move to another controversial amendment that's on the ballot, Amendment 4. We've been hearing a lot about this. This would provide a state constitutional right to abortion before vitality. Now, the wording on this thing, I find personally a little confusing. So what exactly would a no vote mean, and what would a yes vote mean, and what changes?
Well, a no vote basically keeps in place what Florida currently has, which is a ban on most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. It's one of the strictest laws in the country. If a yes vote would reinstate basically what had been abortion law in Florida for almost 50 years, until the United States Supreme Court in 2022 overturned the Roe versus Wade decision. That allowed abortions up to fetal viability, and that is roughly considered to be about 24 weeks of pregnancy. So it would be a dramatic shift in the access people would have to abortion in this state. And this may be one of the most consequential amendments before voters this year, and it looks like it'll be close to getting 60%. The governor is putting his political power behind it to defeat it, using tactics that have brought lawsuits, because he's unleashing state government to fight it in a political matter, creating a state agency website with misleading information about the amendment, and also sending his election security task force into the homes of some people who signed the petitions to get Amendment 4 on the ballot. He may be violating state law, but whether the courts step in and stop him, that's another matter. It's likely either way, he'll be able to get his message out, and he's intending to peel away just enough voters to keep the measure below 60%, killing it.
And if he fails, which would seem to indicate that there was a large Democratic turnout, then it's quite possible that the Republicans lose their supermajority in the Florida House, and Senator Rick Scott suffers his first defeat.
If there's that kind of tidal wave of support for it, I suppose, yeah.
Oh, interesting. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, let's.
DeSantis and his allies are basically, saying that this is going to endanger women by making it likely that, possibly non-doctors will be authorized to perform abortions, and prohibit health and safety checks on clinics. A lot of this abortion for all theme that we hear from abortion opponents at the state and national level, a lot of these claims are pretty dubious. But this goes back to, John, what you were saying a moment ago about the language of the ballot measure. It's, it is perhaps not as precise as some people want it to be, but it, kind of the theme is basically reinstating what had been abortion law in this state for the better part of half a century, until the United States Supreme Court weighed in 2 years ago.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much for that explanation. Let's move to Amendment 5 on Florida's ballot. Amendment 5 sounds good to me on the face of it. It provides an annual inflation adjustment for the value of the homestead property tax exemption. What does that mean for the average homeowner?
Well, that it applies to one of the two homestead exemptions that are now in effect. So, as I understand it, there are two $25,000 exemptions, and the
That's
amendment
right.
applies to one of them.
This will adjust your homestead for inflation. If inflation rose, 3.5% in a year, your $25,000 homestead exemption would increase by $875. School taxes won't be affected. But this reduction in property taxes is forecast to mean that cities and counties would lose over $100 million a year by 2028 and more after that. It's kind of many critics, including like the Florida League of Cities, see this amendment as part of the Republican-controlled legislature's kind of war against local governments and a general resistance to property taxes. Some see it as kind of deepening disparities at the expense of local governments, businesses, renters, and agricultural properties, all of whom may have to pay more to make up for this lost revenue. They also say that it could make it harder for local governments to support first responders, police, firefighters, and other emergency services. But supporters of the amendment say it's going to encourage home ownership. It's going to drive down the cost of home ownership and ensure that over time, as the cost of living goes up, that's reflected in homestead exemption provisions that shield people from paying higher taxes as property values rise. So it's kind of seen as being most helpful to people living in areas where property values are soaring, and also if a homeowner plans to stay in their home. So those are the kind of people that are just getting hit with larger taxes right now. But there's a question about whether this exemption is really needed, but that's going to be up to the voters.
Yeah, it would seem that what is pushing this exemption is more ideology than economics. I mean, the average price of a Florida home is more than $350,000, and you have a $25,000 exemption, and you get like a 3% cost of living. I mean, how much is it actually reducing the average homeowner's tax bill? And you weigh that against the cost of local governments providing services, and it's a cost benefit that I wonder how many voters will perform.
Ruling Republicans in Florida have made a big deal about Joe Biden's inflation, campaigning on that in many election contests around the state. And this is one way to bring that issue, I guess, before the minds of voters once again here, even in a down ballot constitutional amendment. You're going to be reminded, oh, yeah, we're struggling with inflation. So I don't know. There's perhaps a lot of political play in here as well.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's move on to Amendment 6. So Amendment 6 would repeal a constitutional provision providing for public campaign financing for candidates who agree to spending limits. Now, again, I'm a little lost on this language. Is this about using public funds for campaign expenses?
Yes, it is. This is a relic from the what they refer to as the golden era of the Florida legislature, the 1960s and 70s. A public campaign finance measure that. It doesn't provide much money to be relevant, but it's there.
Well, yeah, this is asking voters to abolish this public campaign financing fund. It's been available to candidates for governor and cabinet offices for more than 30 years, beginning as a state law under Florida's last Democratic governor, Lawton Chiles, and then approved by voters for the state constitution in 1998. There was a 2010 constitutional amendment effort to repeal it, but it fell short of this 60% threshold. There's not a lot of advertising or attention on it again this year, and that 60% threshold is hard to reach, and this may be troubled by that again because, John, as you point out, a lot of voters don't really understand the backstory on this or whether it's important or not. The Florida's public
and the
finance
other thing
law.
is,
I was going to say the finance law, it steers taxpayer money to candidates who agree to limit their spending in a campaign to $2 per voter, although there are additions that allow this limit to be exceeded. Governor Ron DeSantis, he got $7 million in public financing in 2022, even though he raised a total of $200 million in campaign cash. And his Democratic opponent, Charlie Crist, got $3 million. It was an idea that came about through Governor Childs, and it was considered groundbreaking at the time, but we're talking 30 years ago. This public financing helped Childs compete and defeat Republican Jeb Bush in 1994. But since then, public financing seems, as James pointed out a moment ago, it's maybe a little bit of a vestige of a past time in government. Still, most good government groups support it, and they're kind of urging voters to keep it in the Florida Constitution. The public money,
and that it's at the end. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the public money is seen really as a way for a low budget candidate to compete with a better financed opponent. That's one of the
and with it at the end of the ballot, maybe it benefits from voter ballot fatigue. That by the time the voter gets there, they've already stopped. They've had enough voting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And people aren't going to understand it that well. Like a lot of these amendments are kind of arcane.
Oh, well, you guys have done a great job in trying to clear these muddy waters a little bit. And as always, I think you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. Once again, thanks to James Call and John Kennedy. I'm John Torres with Florida Today. Thanks for watching.